Hi everyone, it's Maddie Brady. We're here to get real about mental health. Stay tuned for some great conversations with some very special guests. Hi everyone, welcome to the Get Real show. We are here for season 2, kicking it off with Sam. So I wanted to do an episode on more general mental health and what it means to, in this case, Sam. So you identify as a mental health advocate. What does it really mean to you?
To be a mental health advocate, it's a tough question. I think for me, it's about making sure people feel comfortable in regards to talking about mental health. I think there's been such a stigma since as long as I could remember growing up around mental health. And I think as I've gotten older, I've realized it's such a common thing that so many people struggle with. So I just try to be that person for people if they feel like they're struggling or they need to talk to someone too. I also think like outside of like my personal life, it's something that needs to be discussed more. It's definitely more acceptable nowadays to talk about it. But I think just trying to shed awareness on it, make sure people know what resources are available, just stuff along those lines.
And you said in your own personal life, you've struggled with your mental health and have it really dating back in your family tree.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell me about really the beginning of that and when that started and what it looked like for you?
Yeah, totally. So, I'll talk about myself first. The first time I ever saw a therapist was when I was pretty young. We went as a family because my sister was struggling with her own mental health. And she was struggling with an eating disorder at the time. And so we were going as a family. I think I was like 10. And that was the first time I'd ever kind of been in like a therapy setting. It wasn't really focused so much around me. It was more so just like family dynamics and how we could support my sister. And then as I got older, I went through a house fire and I got really bad PTSD from it. So my family had me go to therapy for that. And that was like the first time that I was like in therapy for something related to my own personal experience. And so I saw a therapist for a while. And then when I was at the end of high school, I lost a friend. And so I saw a therapist again to kind of help me grieve and go through that. And then as I've gotten older, I've just kind of realized that having a someone to speak to who doesn't really know anything about me besides what I tell them is really awesome. And it's like a really safe space for me just to get things off my chest. And so for the past year and a half, I've been just talking to someone, going from like once a week to now like twice a month. But in regards to like my family, mental health has always been something that's been a topic of conversation. My grandfather really struggled with mental health, specifically depression. I never got to meet him. He passed away when my mom was 18, but there was such a big stigma around his kind of struggles with mental health, specifically, again, depression. He was brilliant. I was named after him. I don't know if the genes like pass on along to me. But he went to Harvard and he went to MIT, and the courses were too easy for him. So they had to like remake all of these courses for him. But like depression wasn't talked about. And so when I was older, I kind of found out that he had struggled with mental health, but growing up, it wasn't really something my family talked about. And I think it wasn't until we went to go see someone to support my sister that my parents really sat me down and were like, okay, like your grandfather actually did struggle with depression. This is what it is and this is what it means. And yeah, he passed away when my mom was 17. So probably in like the 80s. I don't even think Prozac was around. But from my mom's experience, witnessing that firsthand, her and my grandma have, had their own battles with depression and anxiety. But I've always kind of made it to be a very open space. Same with my sister too. I think I'm really lucky in the sense that from a young age, my parents were like, this is what it means to feel a certain way. If you feel that way, like, let us know and we can help you get support. So for me, it's never really been like a stigma. I've never really been afraid to talk about it. And I think I've had my own personal experiences, like growing up and going through traumatic events, and then even getting older and like realizing I had anxiety, because it wasn't until I was in my 20s in college that I realized like I had anxiety. I would call my parents and be like, I feel off, like I feel shaky. My mom was like, anxiety, like there's a word for it. But I'd never been on medication before. And like my family was on medication for their mental health. But I just was like, I don't need it. Like, it's fine. I also think there's like obviously a stigma around medication too sometimes. So it wasn't until I actually decided to move to New York that I had a really bad panic attack. And I literally sat down and I was like, okay, like I need to go on medication and I need to find a therapist. And so since then, like, I think obviously going through my own experiences with mental health, it's definitely been something that's always kind of like at the forefront for me in regards to obviously how's my own mental health doing, but like how can I support other people? Like how can I support my family? What are they going through? How can I help them? What are my friends? What are my coworkers going through? And it's kind of just like bled into every aspect of my life.
That's really interesting because in my family, we definitely have a history of mental health issues, a lot of addiction, but it was never talked about at all. So I think that's quite interesting that from a young age that you were also open about it. I'm sure that helped you and your sister, because yeah, in my family it was very keep your issues to yourself. Like even between siblings, if we were going through things, it was really demonstrated not to share that with each other. So I'm sure that was great that you had the open family dynamic so young. And I've talked about it on here obviously before, but I struggled with an eating disorder for quite some time, and I always wonder the impact that had on my family and my loved ones and people around me seeing me suffer. What was that really like from having to watch somebody you love go through that?
I mean, I was really young. Like my sister and I, we were 17 months apart. So like we grew up sharing a room, like we're like this. When she like had an imaginary friend, her name was Claire. She would kill me for telling the story. I had one Claire Jr. because I wanted to be exactly like her. And we actually our house had a flood before it had a fire. But we had to live in a hotel for 6 months. And so we were just eating like hotel food. My sister was like 11 or 12. And obviously like our bodies are changing. My sister gained some weight, and we were at this like really intense private school at the time. And these girls literally looked at my sister and they were playing this guessing game on her weight. And they were like, oh, you weigh a lot less than we think you did because you look really big. And my sister's 11 or 12. And so that was kind of just like the start of it. And for her, she explained it as really the only thing in her life she could control. She wasn't what she would call super smart or super athletic. So eating was really the only thing that she had full control over. So I didn't really realize it. I think my parents kind of just like kept me off to the side for a bit. But my sister ended up being pulled out of school, and my mom like homeschooled her for the remainder of the year. And my parents would take her to doctor's appointments. Like she never sought like formal inpatient treatment. But I just remember, going to family therapy and us being like, how can we support my sister? What can we say around her? Or what are we allowed to say? And I don't really think I understood like the gravity of it until I got older. And then I actually worked at an eating disorder treatment center at a college. So I think my experiences when I'm younger have like definitely like shaped me and affected me, but I haven't really sat with it to think about, okay, like when I was 11 or 12? Like, how did that experience make me who I am now? I think it's like something I'll always, carry with me. She's my older sister, but I'm still like very protective of her. And I think so too. Like, I try to be careful in regards to like when I see my friends, if they've lost weight, rather than like making comments being like, oh, you look skinny. Being like, hey, like, is everything okay? Like, are you eating enough? Or if like my friends want to lose weight, it's like, are you doing it in a healthy way? I think obviously my experience dealing with my sister and like working at that eating disorder treatment center, it's just, those are the way I kind of like approach things. But I think so too. It's like, you never really know what someone's going through unless you go through it yourself. So I'll never really be able to understand what my sister went through, what she deals with now. Same with you. I can only like try to understand based off of my experience. But I mean, it's tough to watch a sibling member go through something like that at a young age, but definitely didn't realize kind of the effect it had on me until I got, a lot older.
Definitely. Yeah, I feel like I didn't realize how much I was actually impacting other people around me, because I feel like when you think of more addiction with alcohol or drugs, and you hear the story of somebody stealing from their family to get money for it, and that you can tell clearly, obviously they're hurting their family, but so I didn't realize that, okay, my eating issues were affecting the people around me. And then in hindsight, I definitely see that. Even I look back and I'm like, oh, my one friend used to not eat with me all day too, and she didn't have an eating disorder. Then I think, okay, I probably was negatively affecting her, where everyone's an impressionable age in high school. Mine was tail end of high school, really college. So all college girls are at a very susceptible age to getting an eating disorder. And I'm sure that I was passing on my negative habits, where then my friends thinking, okay, she's not eating, why am I gonna sit here and eat by myself, basically. So I definitely carry some guilt with that. Obviously try to forgive myself for all of that, but it's definitely an interesting take hearing someone that was in the family having to deal with it, because it doesn't just affect you, it affects everyone around you. And it affected my ability to be a friend, to be a family member. There were times that people needed me that I was unable to show up for it, because you're so consumed with this disease. So I think it's amazing that you went on to then work at an eating disorder center.
I mean, I graduated during the pandemic, and I remember I was like applying to jobs, and I was like, I studied psychology, counseling, and clinical science. Like, totally was like gonna be a therapist, maybe go into social work, and obviously no one's hiring. It's COVID. And I like saw this job posting, and I was like, oh, okay, eating disorder treatment center. My sister had an eating disorder. Like, I want to help people. Literally had a quick interview, and they were like, yeah, when can you start? And I was like, I graduate in a week. I can start afterwards. And it was one of like the most eye-opening jobs I ever had. But it was probably it'll probably be the hardest job I ever had too. I don't know if it was because of COVID or just the people I was working with, but I think being an essential worker during a pandemic that was a lot. But then I would also take everything I would witness home with me. So I was working with people, with kids, and up until like older women. So it definitely like subconsciously would like trigger my own experience dealing with my sister. And I was so much more kind of like aware of her eating habits and like what she would be eating more than ever. So like when I would have an off day and she would be working and maybe she'd only be drinking coffee, I'd be like, did you eat breakfast yet? What are you eating for breakfast? What are you having for lunch? Or like, what are you gonna eat for dinner? Like, did you eat enough today? And when I worked at at the treatment center, we would have to like give cues for the people to keep eating. And so to like make jokes when we would be like sitting eating a family dinner, I'd be like, let's make sure we're eating everything, and like look at my sister. And to me, like that was my way of like coping with like a really stressful, tough day. But I think it definitely like was triggering my sister too, because she could feel me watching her a lot more. she was probably feeling like triggered by my stories, like coming home being like, oh my God, we like someone wasn't eating today and they might have to go to the hospital tomorrow. And it's such like a sensitive topic too. And I don't think I realized how serious my sister's eating disorder was at such a young age until I started working with people at that age from when she had it. And I think just seeing like young girls so impressionable, struggle with eating disorder, it was just like so mentally hard too. It was really difficult.
Yeah, I'm sure. And that's something that is really important that I think everyone needs to remember is the power of your words and different things that you say. And a lot of times it really is people just don't realize, but there are certain things that can make it a lot worse. Like I've had people come to me and ask, I think that my sister, my friend, or whoever has an eating disorder, what should I say to them? And I think that's really important. And I'm by no means a professional or no 100%, but I know in my case, like a lot of times I think the initial thought is when you see someone and they're shockingly thin to say, oh, you're so skinny. And that like feeds the disorder.
Oh yeah, it's literally a positive reinforcement.
Yes, saying it looks like you lost weight. Even when it crosses to the point when people are saying, oh, you look sickly thin or you look sickly skinny, it's still all you're hearing is I look skinny.
Yeah, like I look good. Yeah.
And then it just feeds the disease even more. And there's also a very secretive aspect to it where I definitely think sometimes it is hard where you feel like you're being watched. So sometimes that is a little tough when people are paying extra attention to what you're eating because you know that they are, and then that can sometimes make it harder because you're trying to do the right thing. You might not be at that point yet, and there's just so many steps where you can't always do and say the right thing, but you can certainly try to educate yourself and try to do the right thing. But there really isn't a clear-cut guide how to handle the situation because sometimes people just aren't ready to get help yet, and people have to be ready themselves. It's the same thing with alcoholism, with drug addiction, with everything. You can plead and say facts and tell stories, but until the actual person is ready, they unfortunately can't get help. But it's definitely good to have people in your life supporting you and saying the right things.
Yeah. And I think it's also something that my sister's obviously going to deal with for the rest of her life. Like, she's, oh my God, she's 27 now. Like, she's getting ready. She got engaged. She's preparing to get married soon. Like, I get nervous. Like, okay, like people go on those wedding diets. Like, is that something my sister is going to think about? Like, is she eating enough when she's stressed about work during the day or like stuff like that? But I think so too. Like, she is so open about it as well. And I think, where I'm lucky in the sense that like if I have questions, like when I was working at the eating disorder treatment center, like I would ask my sister like, hey, like why did you get one, or like what did you struggle with? So it was like a lot for her to like kind of relive and retell those stories, but it was also kind of insightful for me in a way too, because then I was like, okay, so when I make a joke like let's make sure we're eating everything on our plate, it's actually really triggering and it's not funny even though I think it is. Or when you make a comment to someone being like, oh my God, like you look so skinny, like what are you doing? And they're actually struggling, like that's not a good thing to say. Like how you should phrase, if you're worried about someone, how you should phrase your worries. Or even if I think the also flip side of it too is like if people have gained weight, how do you address it? Like in high school, I remember everyone was so worried about gaining the freshman 15. And like we were so susceptible to like if people would post like on Instagram, be like, oh my God, like they totally gained the freshman 15. It's like, okay, but like are they going through like unhealthy behaviors through that? So I think just like the way you also talk about it too moving forward, and even like with people who might have struggled with it in the past is really important. But I also think too, like so many people have like undiagnosed eating disorders, they just don't realize it. Just with like their like irresponsible behaviors or like behaviors that just simply aren't healthy.
Yeah.
It's like that's probably like teetering eating disorder a little bit. But again, like I'm not a diagnosed professional, so
Yeah.
I can only assume.
Definitely. No, I like the part where you said even about people putting on the freshman 15 and then saying things like, yes, sometimes it's just they're partying and, you know, they're not working out as much and they're enjoying their freshman year. But sometimes binge eating is also an eating disorder. People forget, and sometimes people cope with food also. So it doesn't mean that they're hurting any less than the girl or man or woman starving themselves. That people cope sometimes negatively by overeating because that can feel like comfort to them or an array of different reasons. But that, yeah, whatever way your weight is fluctuating, I definitely think that you need to be someone extremely close to that person and go about it in the best way possible in order to address it, because chances are there's a lot of pain behind that.
Yeah. That's also like people also are so quick to judge. I think especially like on social media, like everyone, if people gain a lot of weight or lose a lot of weight, everyone's first instinct is, let me scroll back and see when they first started gaining weight or first started losing weight.
Yeah.
Like the first time you see someone maybe after they've lost weight for whatever reason, you're always like, the question is always, you want to know why. Like, do they have an eating disorder or did they lose weight in a healthy way? And I think it's just like this innate curiosity to like know. And like my kind of instinct is always like, okay, like how well do I know this person? If I know them well enough, like, do I feel comfortable saying, hey, like, hope all is well? Like, you know, there's so many different avenues you can go about it. I'm never going to like insert myself into someone's life and be like, hey, I think you have a problem.
Yeah.
But if I'm like close enough with the person and, you know, from high school, I had a couple friends who would like take Adderall because it wouldn't make them hungry. And like looking back, I didn't realize that was like a bad behavior. But now I'm like, okay, like now that we're in our 20s, like, do you still do that? Are you still struggling with your weight, or you know, are you trying to lose weight in unhealthy ways again? Like, what's that been like? So I think just like obviously just being conscious of it too.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. A lot of unhealthy behaviors that are eating disorder behaviors are normalized in the athletic community, in the like sorority girl community, in the college community, because looking back, there's obviously people that take it to extremes like myself, but then it doesn't mean that other person that you're looking at doesn't mean their behavior isn't also unhealthy. But I would sometimes justify my actions. Oh, everyone's doing that, or it seems like everyone doesn't eat lunch, or whatever it was, that there's a lot of unhealthy behaviors, or especially like part of my eating disorder, I was bulimic, and I remember a lot of girls, after they would go out at nighttime and they would get drunk and eat a lot of food, they would pull the trigger. They would pull the trigger in the morning to make themselves feel better. But I thoroughly believe a lot of times it was more so a panic, like, oh my gosh, I went out last night and I had an entire pizza pie, or I had 10 pounds of fries when I was drunk, and now I have to get rid of it. So then I knew obviously when I got to the point of bulimia, because it was progressive, that I knew obviously that it was wrong what I was doing. However, then you see these other people doing it and you're like, oh, well, I probably don't do it that much more than them. And there's all these ways to justify it because there's all these other people doing unhealthy behaviors. And then people would honestly talk about it so casually. Like to me, because I was deep in an eating disorder, I was very secretive. So everything I did was secret. But to other people, they would just be sitting there with their friends saying, oh yeah, like have to pull the trig. Oh my God, I had so much pizza last night. I feel so sick. This will make me feel better. And that's just one example, but definitely Adderall, definitely cocaine, definitely the tons of things that people
also
did.
like excessive exercising too. Like I didn't really realize how like, not even like excessive, like I just remember like I had a friend who would clean her like dorm room, and then like when she lived off campus, she would wear like ankle and like hand weights while she cleaned, because it would help her lose weight faster.
Yeah.
Or friends who would do like intermittent fasting, and like I think I'm like, I love the facade. Like I've fallen for it. Like I'm like, okay, like if I like just have a coffee for breakfast and just drink a lot of water when I wake up, like then I can just wait till lunch. But like I'm self-aware enough to be like, okay, that's literally not healthy. Like I need to eat something for breakfast. I need to eat something for lunch. But I think you're just so susceptible at any age too, especially in college. Like I was in a sorority. I remember like, you know, seeing girls engage in really unhealthy behaviors, my friends included. And it's just like, you're at such an impressionable age. Like you don't know what to say. You don't know how it's going to be perceived. And I think so too. A lot of it also comes down to like family. Like, did your family ever talk to you about like what an eating disorder was? Does your mom or your dad have unrealistic or unhealthy relationships with food? So I think so much can kind of like go into it that no one really ever thinks about.
100%.
And then it kind of feed into like your own like struggles as well.
Yeah, definitely. No, I've talked a lot about, obviously I do endurance sports, and today it's about the actual sport, and it took years to redevelop my relationship with running, with the other ones weren't really an issue, mostly running. But yeah, back in the day, I used it as a form of self-punishment, where today I use it as a form of self-love. But the difference is it's all in the thoughts. And that's the one thing that, I mean, sometimes it bothers me today, but you definitely can't control what other people say. But people will be like, oh my gosh, I had a slice of cake, I have to go for a run in the morning. And people still casually in our society use exercise as a means to fix what they just ate or what they just did, instead of saying, oh my gosh, it's gonna be 70 degrees tomorrow, I can't go for a run. It's like, I just had 2 brownies, I have to go running. And that, I think, is definitely just does not make the exercise enjoyable. Who's going to enjoy if you're thinking the whole time about, I have to burn off whatever I just ate? You're never going to enjoy it. And then moving forward, you're really not going to like exercising, because you've wired your brain to think exercise equals punishment instead of enjoyment and challenging myself and pushing my body and having fun. It's punishment. And that's definitely how it went from enjoyment for me to punishment to thankfully back to enjoyment. But yeah, that's definitely something I heard even with a lot of athlete friends and a lot of people just casually, and men too, because people think a lot of times that it's just women that struggle with eating disorders, and a lot of men will do more casual unhealthy behaviors like that, like oh my gosh, I just had curly fries, I need to go for a 10-mile run or go rowing or whatever it is to burn it off. But that's definitely not where you want to be at any gender.
Yeah, no, 100%. I can think of like one of my friends who, like, his weight has fluctuated, and he's in really great shape now, and he really prioritizes his health and working out. But I think it sometimes makes me nervous when I see people who do maybe endurance sports or do exercise a lot. Like, I think my first innate reaction is, because my sister used it as punishment, now she doesn't, but for so many people I know, they see exercise as punishment. I'm like, oh my God, like, are they healthy?
Yeah.
Like, if you have a 12-pack, like, are you doing it because, like, you're having fun and you love working out, or are you doing it as, like, a form of punishment? So I think it's important also to keep that in mind, too. And, like, I have to remind myself of that. Like, just because someone went from maybe not working out to working out a lot, that doesn't necessarily mean, like, they're in a bad headspace or they're struggling with something. It could just be their way of actually taking care of themselves. But I think it also all comes down to, like, your approach to it, and, like, also understanding, like, how that person is feeling, and if they are struggling, like, okay, like what can I do to support you through that?
Yeah, I really think it's all headspace, because even I'm thinking right now, there's a lot of fitness accounts that start off having a restrictive eating disorder, and they're going from anorexia, and then often they get obsessed with this body image of being strong and a certain physique. And sometimes it's awesome for them. They're actually focused on being strong, and it's an empowering, amazing feeling. And then other times I feel like I see some accounts where like you can tell they're just obsessed in a different way, and that cannot be good as well. If you're still tracking like the size of your waist or the size of your arms or any numerical tracking when it comes to the size of our body.
MyFitnessPal.
Yeah. I don't think that's great. I don't know what that is, but I
oh my
know
god,
the apps.
oh my god, yeah.
I know it actually in the beginning of my eating disorder, the very, very, very started with an app. I don't even remember the name it was, but I was like, I have to lose weight, so I got this app, and then just got obsessed. So yeah, I think those are a nightmare, and that's the whole diet culture in general. Like you mentioned, intermittent fasting, and then there's this diet and that diet, and diets are sold to us, especially women, to have us just go in a pattern, because it's not let's eat healthy, let's eat in moderation, let's eat our favorite foods and good portion sizes and have that dessert when you want it, so you don't have 5 tomorrow. But it's sold to us, go on this diet, and then there's a mental aspect. It's not just here's this diet, have it. There's an actual mental aspect to it, where then your brain is not enjoying that diet, your brain's not used to it, and then you're going to end up, a lot of people then do yo-yo dieting, and then they end up binging because they didn't actually want that salad when they were told to have the salad, and then it's just a repetitive pattern.
I think I grew up pretty lucky because my parents were always so open about so many things, and I think after my sister kind of got better with her eating disorder and was in recovery, like my house, we had this like pantry downstairs, and we would always have so many snacks, because my parents, I think they probably grew up in pretty restrictive households. They knew that for my sister and I, like if they put something in front of us, they want us to know that like it's okay, we can have it. Like always giving us like knowledge and information as power was kind of like their mindset and motto. So I was always the house that had the best snacks, because my parents knew, okay, like if I love ham and Dorito sandwiches, but they're like, if we don't have Doritos, like Sam doesn't have to eat a bag of Doritos. Like, you know, just because it's there doesn't mean I need to eat the whole thing. But it definitely taught me like moderation, because I know if I like say to myself, oh, like I'm craving something sweet, but I can't eat something sweet. Okay, I'll hold it off, and then I'll probably eat something sweet within like the next couple days, and then I'll have like not had it, so then I want it again and again, and it's just like exactly what you said. It's like this yo-yo. Like if you everything in moderation, I think, like obviously some things like aren't good for you, but like majority for things in moderation, like you're telling yourself it's okay, and it is okay. Like, should you eat Oreo ice cream for breakfast, lunch, and dinner? No. But do I like a sweet treat at the end of every day? Yeah. Yes. Am I gonna have ice cream like or dessert every night? Hell yeah. Like to me, that's just how I've always grown up, and I think I'm lucky to have, you know, had my parents and my grandma and my sister kind of foster that environment where like they show me, you know, what's okay and what's not okay, or even if it's not okay, like what that means, like you know, what anxiety means, what depression means, like what it feels like to feel anxious or depressed, like how you can seek support through that. Or if I am struggling with my eating too much or eating too little, like what does that mean? Who can I talk to about it? So I think just like constantly being open was always beneficial. But again, I don't think I realized some of the stuff that I was going through like until I was a lot older. So now I'm like, oh, okay, like I understand why my parents talked to me about it at that age, or like, oh, that's what they meant when they said, you know, X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. And you said also in the town you grew up in that there were a lot of people taking their own lives or just a lot of loss at a very young age. What was that like? Like, it seems like you had to really figure out what a lot of these mental health issues were very young. What impact did that really have on you? And do you remember your initial thoughts when that was happening?
Yeah, I remember, like, I unfortunately went through some loss at a young age in regards to like losing physical things. So I had a flood and I had a house fire. And I remember I was really upset about my house burning down because all I could think about was how my kids aren't going to have baby photos of me or like little knickknacks and stuff they'll never get to see. And I remember like feeling depressed, but not really having a word for it. But then when I sought therapy and I was like seeing someone for PTSD, like it was really, really helpful. And this was also around the time when like mental health in my town was really bad. So I was like kind of cued into my own mental health as well as the people around me. And my family faced like a lot of backlash and a lot of like bullying and people talking about us when our house burned down. And so that was like really affecting not only my mental health, but my family's. So then we went through my town and we had separate high schools. Within like 3 months, 3 people committed suicide. Wow. And so we went from like these anti-bullying days in school to like suicide awareness days. And so I'm like struggling with my own stuff going on in my personal life. And then all of a sudden, this girl I went to middle school with, she passes away. And so like that was my first experience with like like physical loss of like a person. And I think when you're 15 or 16 and you lose someone that you know, but you also don't really know, you know of them, or you maybe you grew up in the same town as them, your first instinct is like, can I swear?
Yeah.
It's like, holy fucking shit, like what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And for it to happen not once, not twice, but 3 times within that short amount of time, that's basically our whole town was like, oh my God, like what is going on? I do think like when you go through things at such a young age and you don't spend the time to like sit down and think about, okay, like how is this affecting me or affecting the people around me? It's so easily you can make someone else's trauma about yourself. And like this is something that I preach all the time. Like I've gone through my own personal shit. Other people have gone through their own personal shit, but I'm never going to make someone's personal shit my own shit. So my first instinct, I think when, someone in my grade passed away was obviously to post about it because I saw other people posting about it. Because I felt like if I'm not talking about it, I'm not a good person. And then I think my other, innate thought was what happened? I think everyone has this curious, desire to always know the why behind things, either through addiction or anything going on in people's life. Everyone always wants to know why. And so our whole town was kind of this big why. Like, why is this happening? Why are people committing suicide? Why is this now becoming an epidemic? What can we do? Why these people? Why those scenarios? All that stuff. And so it was really like a really dark time. Everyone in my school was really affected by it. And I think that people who were really close to the people who passed away probably felt extremely overwhelmed by it all. And it wasn't until I lost someone my senior year close to me that I understood what those people were going through. And then I was on the opposite side of it. So I went from kind of like this observer bystander to someone actually experiencing the loss. And I think being on the other side of it, I think being on both sides has really kind of like made me extremely self-aware of like how complex mental health and suicide and addiction and just spreading awareness about it is, because you never really understand what someone's going through unless you experience it yourself. And there's such this cliche video that I've seen 50,000 times. Every single psychology class I took has shown it to me, but it's a Brene Brown video. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
No.
And it's the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I think it was like a TED Talk, but basically empathy is like getting down in a hole with someone, and sympathy is like looking above. And it wasn't until I had acknowledged my sister going through an eating disorder and then working at the treatment center that I was like, okay, now I can really empathize with what my sister is going through. It wasn't until like when I saw people lose someone due to suicide, or addiction or stuff like that, like I could sympathize with them, but it wasn't until like I dealt with it personally that I was like, I actually get it. And I think that's close to me have gone through on anyone, but I think it's honestly made me so incredibly self-aware that it's made me who I am today. And I've just taken those experiences with me and tried to, make the best out of it.
Did they teach you at all what to say when you think somebody's struggling around you, or any warning signs for when somebody's really getting to that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like a cliche, stupid high school shit. Like, I would love to go back to my hometown and even other hometowns and just be like, like the stupid DARE programs. Like, I think people are so afraid to talk about drugs and alcohol and mental health and all that stuff to kids because they are impressionable, and you think, oh, if you tell a kid like this is alcohol, they're gonna like go and drink it, or like this is weed, they're gonna go and smoke it. But like if you actually equip them with the information, they're probably not going to be as curious about it, so they're probably not going to try. And so for us it was like, are people not showing up to school? Is your friend dissociating? Like, is your friend saying like I'm suicidal? Like, the fact of the matter is, at least in my experience, dealing with people who have been at that point, no one's really saying like, hi, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
You're kind of like aware of their behaviors, and you're like, okay, like maybe you just went through a traumatic event. Do you have a support system? How are you dealing with that event? Like, are you going to seek therapy? Like how are you mentally processing it? What can I do to support you? Rather than like, oh, are you going to kill yourself? And I think sometimes too, and I'm a habit of it, like I use humor to like cope when I feel down. And I'll make jokes to make like light of the situation. So like when my mental health is bad, I'll be like, like I'll make a stupid joke.
Yeah.
But then I have to think about, okay, like it's actually a really serious thing. Like, am I actually doing okay? And if I'm not, like, what can I do to make myself feel better? Like, who can I talk to? Who can I reach out to? But I think like there's so much more research and just like awareness that needs to go into like new and improved like presentations for like middle and high schoolers and even like college students, because they just can't relate to it. And if you can't relate to it, you're not going to take the time to understand. And if you're not going to take the time to understand, chances are if someone's struggling, you're not going to be able to be aware of it, and you're not going to be able to help them.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more about the presentations. We're actually having someone on, Serena, that goes and volunteers and talks about addiction in high school because of the way that it used to be taught was just not working. They were exactly what you're saying, the DARE programs and these presentations that really didn't sit with students when really they need people closer to their age range that are more relatable and speak to them like actual human beings and realize that kids can actually comprehend things and understand things and want to know the information. So I do think that's really important. But I was even thinking as I asked you, like I do know I'm really aware, obviously from personal experience, on picking up eating disorder symptoms and addiction symptoms and all of that. But I don't know if I would really know if someone was teetering on that line. So it is really scary, especially I think in the addiction community when people are struggling and then they get help and then maybe they relapse and you never really know like, is this going to be another relapse where they're okay and they're going to get help again like they did the 3 other times, or is it a lot more serious? And it's really hard for any of us to really know. And we touched on it briefly before the episode, but talking about then what's the difference between boundaries and constantly wanting to help people, because I think there's a point where you have to put a boundary up sometimes to protect yourself, but then what if that person that's saying they need help that you're like, oh my gosh, they always do this, actually needs it then and there. And I think it's really hard for us as human beings to be able to make that judgment call, because we, exactly what you said, we never really know. We never know what somebody's going through. And that's what I think sometimes for me leads me down the road of then not putting a boundary up, because I'm always scared that it's a lot more serious than
I mean, that's literally the one of the main reasons why I got a therapist this time around was I had no boundaries. My parents used to literally be like, Sam, like, stop caring so much about other people. Like, for the love of God, like, please put yourself first. But I think just going through all the stuff I have in my life, my brain has just never operated that way. So I'm always thinking, who can I support? Who can I help? Rather than focusing on me. So like the past year and a half, I've done a lot of work in figuring out what like my own boundaries are. Boundaries I didn't even know I had or wanted. And I think it's tough too, because I teeter this line of, I have these boundaries now where I'm trying to prioritize myself and, you know, what's best for me. But if I see someone struggling, like, I can't not do something. And I think it's like my best quality, but it's also like one of the biggest things I struggle with, because it's like, at what point am I letting someone else's maybe struggles or problems like affect my personal day to day? Like, just because they're maybe struggling with something, that doesn't need to make it my issue. I can still support them, but I can also say, listen, like, I'm going to support you to this extent, or I can help you during these hours. But like, if you're calling me 45 times during a work day, like, I can't be that person for you. Like, I need you to find someone else. Outside of that, I can. So I think it's just like being really honest with yourself. Like, how much can I give? Because I think also too, like, I'm such a person who wants to help other people, but if I'm like running on empty, like I can't be that person for people. Like, so I think it's also about too, like, just like being really in touch with yourself. But I think it's the hardest thing is like, you really don't know what someone's going through unless you or someone close to you has gone through it yourself. That's, I really think, the only reason or the only way that you can really understand or really be able to support someone. Because at the end of the day, like, no one wants to hear you're sorry. Like, you all I want to hear when I'm upset is I get it. Or I've been in the same situation as you, or I feel the same way. I don't want to hear like, oh, that sucks, like, it'll get better. Like, I know it will, but like, do you feel how I'm feeling? Like, you want to feel that sense of like connection. You don't want to feel alone.
Exactly. And that's something I've worked on, something for myself. I try to, at least today, you almost have to have an off switch where you can help that person, but then you have to be able to turn it off when it's time to focus on your job or your life or whatever you're doing at that moment. Because I definitely think when you do empathize with people, if you just let that seep in, then you're constantly going to be depressed and anxious yourself because you're letting the weight of the world fall on you. And really, you have to remember that you can help people and help yourself at the same time. And exactly what you said, if you're on empty, what can you even give to someone? You need to make sure your cup is full first and then be able to give. And then in the off emergency situation that somebody does really need you and you're at work or you're doing something for yourself, that you are able to drop everything and go care for them when it is a true emergency, because the norm is that you care for yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm like, I'll be honest, like I've been struggling. I cry sometimes, but I'm like honest about it. Like I think if you're not honest about it, like chances are someone else won't be honest with you. So like when I'm struggling or when I'm down, like I have no problem being like, yep, I'm having a shitty day, or yep, I gotta leave work early, like I have therapy, or yep, gotta take my Prozac. Like I'm an open book, as you probably can tell. I have no problem being open, because I think in the off chance that someone's like, oh, like you're on Prozac, like you have anxiety and depression, like me too, like how did you realize that? Like that's when I'm like, oh my God, like me being open and honest has just opened up a little door into someone who could potentially be struggling, and now I can support and help them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's always important too to like, obviously I know my boundaries, I know what I'm comfortable talking about and what I'm not comfortable talking about, but I think as long as at the end of the day when I go to sleep being like, you know what, if I made people laugh talking about like the fact that I have therapy, and maybe it kind of destigmatized the fact that, you know, I'm 26 and I have a therapist, and maybe they're going to start looking into someone, you know, that's a good day in my book. And I've had scenarios with that, with like, I'll just say things in passing and like people will come up to me and be like, hey, like, how'd you find your therapist? And I'm like, okay, like let's chat, like this is the website I used, or like, what do you think you might need a therapist for? Like, you don't have to talk to me about it. But I think I just let my openness kind of seep into everything and every avenue in my life. So whether someone needs to talk to me about maybe something that they're struggling with right now, or maybe something that they struggled with a couple of years back, or maybe they have someone that's in their life that that's struggling and they don't know how to approach them. Like I just always try to be that avenue or that middle person, so that people can always like get answers and stuff. But it's also a lot of stress and it's a lot of pressure I put on myself to consistently be that person. Yeah. Especially when it's for people who especially when it's like not my personal like experience that I've gone through, if I'm like holding space for other people. So like when people come to me about like an eating disorder or like addiction, it's like I have dealt with it on not like on a personal basis, but not like a first-hand immediate basis. So like I can only give so much, or I can only share so much, because at the end of the day, like I didn't have an eating disorder like my sister did. So I can only share, you know, my experiences being a sister to someone who had it and working in a clinic. But at the end of the day, like I don't know the in and outs of it, or like what it's actually like to have one. So I think just knowing where those boundaries are too is really important.
Definitely. Yeah, I think dealing with so many issues so young and watching other people deal with things definitely leads to then not wanting to have boundaries, because you grow up as the support system. You're the helper. You're the person that always wants to make sure everyone's okay. And that's why if you are in that position, there are 12-step programs even for people dealing with a loved one in addiction, or that grew up with a mother or father in addiction, or a wife, husband, spouse, partner, sibling, child even, because it affects everyone. And even if it's something as little as then, it's hard for you to set a boundary because you don't want anyone else to have to feel like your sister did, or have to feel like somebody in your school did. So I think that is definitely a really hard place to be in, and I definitely don't have the answers, because as I said, it's something that that I could use work on too. I do think the position I'm in now, I wouldn't want to change that. I'll always try to help the best of my ability, but I won't let it interfere with what I have to do for myself. And I think that's a good place to be in. And the people that maybe myself a couple years ago that need to reevaluate their relationship with helping people are the people that, okay, you skipped what made you feel good that day to help somebody else and deal with somebody else's problem. There are ways to direct people, I think, to get professional help or just direct them to resources that could help them unless it's a really dire situation.
Yeah. I think my biggest takeaways just from like my own personal experiences and like just going through all I have in my life, so much easier said than done, but like don't judge just don't judge someone. Like you literally never know what someone's going through, and even if you think you do, you probably don't. And I'm full of fault of that. Like we live in such a judgmental society. I judge people every day, people I know, people I don't. So I always try to keep that in check. Like, what am I judging them based off of? What do I actually know about them? And I think so too. What I didn't realize then, what I understand now is like so many people have gone through what I have too. It definitely makes me feel a lot less isolated than I did growing up. Like, I think also too, it's so, I don't want to say it's so normalized now, but if you would have told me that like I would have so many friends from home and in the city and even friends of friends who know someone who's either struggling with addiction or lost a life to addiction or is in recovery, I'd be like, you're lying. If you told me that when I was like 16.
Yeah.
Or if you told me that, you know, I would meet people who have been suicidal, and, you know, happily did not succeed and are still around today. And, you know, would I have expected that? No, but I think it's such a big part of so many people's lives. And it's just not normalized enough. And I think we're like obviously heading in the right direction to talk about it more. So thank you for having me on this podcast.
Of course.
But I think so too. Like if we are going to normalize it and talk about it more, like you cannot judge. Like, and it's something that every human does is judge right away and want to know why. But if you really just take a step back and you say, okay, like, I don't understand what this person is going through, but I want to. I think that's like kind of where you start. It's like, okay, like you're telling me you're struggling right now. I don't get what you're going through. Like, can you talk to me about it? Or you mentioned that you're feeling really down recently. What's going on? Like, do you feel comfortable talking to me about it? Like, if not me, who can you talk to about it? And just really coming from a place of like not being judgmental, I think is like the best advice my therapist ever gave me. And like what I try to tell everyone I meet is like, you got to sometimes meet people where they're at. And even if they're in a really deep and dark place, like you can't judge them from where they're at. You kind of got to meet them where they are and then find ways to support them through it or get them to support.
Definitely. Yeah, I was talking about it with one of my friends also in recovery, is we were saying recovery and addiction is everywhere but nowhere, because when you think about it, everybody knows a family member, a friend, themselves. Everybody knows someone touched by addiction. But then when you're in an office or you're at a party or you're somewhere, you feel like you're the only person that is dealing with that. So you think, like, I used to think, at least, now I'm very vocal about it, but I'm the only person with this problem. I'm the only person at this whole party that is sober. I'm the only person at work that's sober. And most of the time it's not true, but the other people, at least before the past couple of years, weren't saying anything either. So then there's 2 people, there's 3 people, there's 4, there's 5 sitting there all feeling alone, all feeling like their case is isolated and they're the only person on earth that ever felt that way, when really a lot of us felt that way. And it's the exact same for, you can apply it to EDs, you can apply it to suicide ideations, you can apply it to depression, anxiety, whatever it is that you're going through. Other people are going through it, and it could be literally the person next to you in the room, and you're both thinking, I'm the only person that's ever felt this way, and all you need to do is open up and speak about it, which is obviously quite hard, especially when you're in this situation.
Yeah, and I think so too. Like, that's probably why I am so vocal about it, is I never want anyone to sit next to me and feel like they can't talk to me about something. So like all my social media talks about mental health and resources, and in college I joined this like peer group where I was like trained by our staff in our counseling center in school, and because peers are more likely to go to peers rather than like an adult. Because I always wanted to be that person where if like someone looked around the room and was like, I need someone to talk to, I always wanted to be that open book where they're like, well, we know Sam has anxiety and, you know, has gone through some really traumatic periods in her life, has experienced depression and PTSD and loss and all this stuff. Like, we know she can help support us. Like, I always try to be that person. But I think most importantly, like through my experiences, just like trying to spread awareness too, is like, there's so many people who are going through it silently that you don't know. So I just try to be a lot more mindful of like what I say when I'm in public too. Like I know a lot more people who are sober now. So like my first instinct isn't to be, I know, like my first instinct isn't to be like, oh, you're not going to drink. Like, why? You know, like that's what I used to do. Like, oh, you're not drinking. Why? Like, that's stupid. That's weird.
Yeah.
So like, I just try to be a lot more mindful now as I'm getting older and I'm meeting so many more people who are, you know, going through their own personal battles. It's like, okay, like, first of all, don't ask why, unless they feel comfortable sharing. And just like be really careful of what you're saying and who you're saying it to. I think it just comes down to like taking a second before you also open up your mouth.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to those comments, either ignorance, like in your situation where you just didn't know, you weren't trying to harm anyone, you just didn't know, or then a lot of times people projecting that they feel uncomfortable with someone speaking about their mental health or not drinking or just openly speaking about their issues. When it makes people uncomfortable, you have to remember that chances are they're probably struggling too. And that's the thing that I always try to remember about judgment. And it's human to get worried about people judging you. But the main thing that helps me is to remember that if someone is judging me for being who I am and being authentically myself and putting myself out into the world to the best of my ability at this current moment, then why would I waste a second over their opinion? Because obviously they're not a person that's meant to be in my life and I'm not meant to be in their life, and that's okay. And there's going to be plenty of people out there that are in that situation. And I think as a society we need to just leave it alone if that is the case, and not everybody has to like us. And I think that's hard because everyone wants validation, everyone wants to feel like everybody likes us, but at the end of the day, if you're, I'm going to butcher it, if you're a friend to everyone, you're not a friend to yourself. That's not the quote, but it's along those lines. Yeah. And I truly think that is the case, because in the past, when I wasn't even purposely trying to do it, I mean, definitely I've had points where I've overtly been looking for validation, but then even with like people pleasing in the past, where I try to be the perfect version of what that person's looking for in that moment or at that time, and then I'm not even truly being myself, and I've ended up in friendships where I'm like, this person doesn't even know me. This person knows a persona of myself that I've put on for them to like me, and now I'm friends with them. Is this even a person I want to be friends with? And yeah, it's just not a great situation to be in when you're constantly, and then it just leads to anxiety, obviously, to constantly be worried about uncontrollable factors like people liking you. What I would want people to obviously not dislike me for, or things I wouldn't want people to be able to say about me, is that I'm never rude or mean to people or anything like that. But if it's anything outside of that, it really doesn't matter that they're going to have an opinion, and that you can't control it. So why waste time on uncontrollable factors?
Yeah.
But it's definitely something you have to work to. I'm saying it like, oh, just do this.
No,
but
I know. I mean,
hard.
you and I talk about that, at least in our jobs, like letting things roll off, and like it's hard. And I think, you know, once you're comfortable in yourself, like you, at the end of the day, like you start with yourself and you end with yourself. So like you have to have a good relationship with yourself and who you are to be that person for other people. And it's always going to be a work in progress for so many people, you know, having those healthy relationships with yourself and knowing your boundaries and knowing what you're comfortable talking about or knowing things you want to work on. And that's what I just like try to do every day is think about, okay, like in what ways can I maybe like make myself better? Or if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm stressed, like, am I eating okay? Am I drinking too much? Am I going out too much? Am I not sleeping enough? Am I isolating myself? You know, like always trying to keep myself in check and making sure like I'm putting the best version of myself out there, because at the end of the day, you know, all I have is me when I wake up and I go to sleep. So I got to make sure I'm taking care of that first. And obviously if I can take care of that, I can help other people.
Absolutely. And I think a perfect analogy, which is the reality of our job, is we work in a job that there's a sales aspect to it. And I always say, if you're on a phone call and you mess up and someone is judging you for it, first of all, why can they hear you? Because they're not on the phone themselves. So if you're judging someone for doing something that you're not even doing yourself, or you're scared to do yourself, at the end of the day, you just have to remember, like, what is that person doing to have that authority to judge myself fumbling over my words or saying the wrong thing or saying something silly when they're sitting there, not doing it themselves. And I'm pretty darn sure that every human being in the world has fumbled a word or messed up. And if anything, if you are on a live call and someone's on the other end, I think it makes you seem more of a human being. It makes you seem more vulnerable and relatable rather than just some robot calling someone. But I think that's just the perfect analogy. If somebody is sitting there talking about you, what are they doing? To be able to sit there and say that. I mean, nobody is perfect at the end of the day, and to think that would be pretty vain.
I know. And I think too, like, I think when you grow up and maybe people around you or people in your life experience things that you don't have experience with, like, your first instinct is to judge. And I think as I've gotten older, I've not tried to like normalize, but I try to say, okay, like, why did people maybe judge me? Or why did I maybe judge people? Was it because I didn't have enough information? Was I in a bad place myself? Were they in a bad place? And so, I mean, I'm still working on it, but it's like, you just have to like learn also to, I think, like let things go. Like if I can go to bed every day saying I'm a good friend, I'm a good daughter, a good granddaughter, a good sister, I'm a good support system to people who I love, I'm vocal about my shit and my struggles. And if one person can DM me that I don't know on Instagram being like, hey, like I saw you post this and it really helped, I'm going to get a good night's sleep. You know, if someone says, hey, like you were so open that it made me do A, B, and C, or I appreciate you, like, you fumbled at work today and you like swore on the phone, but then you laughed about it. Like that really like made me feel better. Like, I think if you can just like be a human to other humans at the end of the day, people are going to feel so much more comfortable like talking about what they're struggling with, because like you were saying earlier, like you can be sitting next to someone and have no idea what they're going through. It's not until you open your mouth and you say, hey, like, you were sad, like, are you okay? That like this person will finally feel comfortable to like say something. So it's just about like being vocal and being a good person at the end of the day, and like taking care of yourself so that you can be that person for other people.
Exactly. And even I feel like the act of judging is something that most human beings struggle with initially. I talked about it with Chelsea on a great episode with her, where most human beings are born with this feeling of unworthiness, and it's something they work their whole lives to undo and teach themselves they are worthy. And I think judgment falls in that category where it's just an innate thing that we do. And I think honestly you can trace it back. It's almost like an animalistic thing to do, because you're judging the situation, the room, you're checking for like back in the day safety factors and stuff, but today you're just probably being mean. But it's just something that we all had in us. And I think also the society we grew up in definitely taught us that, from the tabloids and the magazines and the TV and the exposure that we were around, listening to adults speak when you're younger. All of that obviously plays a massive role in thinking that way as well. But it's just something that collectively as a society we definitely need to work on. But I think one conversation at a time, we're breaking down the barriers about mental health and the fact of the matter that we all struggle with different things, but at the end of the day, it's not all that different.
Yeah.
We're all human beings.
I was going to say that. We're all humans. And like, if you can be comfortable with yourself and you know your boundaries and you can be a good friend to other people, like, no one's asking you to like be a person to everyone. Like, be good to yourself, be good to those around you, be good to strangers. Like, you're probably going to have a lot more of a positive effect on people's lives than you realize. And like, you just need to meet people where they're at and accept them where they're at and support them where they're at, and show them how to get to where they want to be.
Exactly. I think at the end of the day, you work on yourself, you grow as a person, and you're able to spread that into society and help other people. So thank you so much for being that person for so many people in your life, for the office, for everyone, really, and coming on and getting real.
Yay! Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in and getting real with us. Podcast will be posted every other Wednesday on Spotify and YouTube. Please reach out via DM if you want to chat.